Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled British Sherman V Firefly. Since the last video update, a lot of progress has been made to the model's suspension as well as lower hull. As we can quickly see, the suspension has been completed and has been installed. We'll be going over these additions in this video. And here goes the lower hull and suspension of the vehicle, just ready for its base coat. For the suspension, in this scene here, all of the suspension components have been improved, modified with the same procedure that I did on the M4A4, and they have their coat of primer now added. In a nutshell, what was done to the suspension to improve them was on the bases themselves, the shape was adjusted slightly to give it more of a realistic appearance. The casting and foundry marks were added, along with rough cast texturing and other small modified details. This is also true for the H-frame, as well as the swing arms. As for the rear idler wheel, just like on the other vehicle that I did, the mill marks and the CNC marks were all buffed away, leaving for a nice smoother appearance and one that's a lot more representative of the actual piece. The wells were also modified for the Zerk fittings, and the Zerk fittings have been added. As normally, they will always be painted red after the vehicle is painted. The main road wheels have also had their modifications made to them. If we recall, on the Armortek M4A4 or Firefly kit, the one face of the road wheel has its detailing on it. However, the other portion is just a hollow cavity. Just like what I mentioned in the other video, I went ahead and made a resin insert that installs to the road wheel, in which you have the face detailing, the wells, as well as all of the rivet fastening detail for the rubber tire. Once the components are assembled, this portion here will be facing out towards the viewer, as is the more detailed compared to the Armortek original. Since the Armortek original does have some basic detailing, it will be nice and adequate for the interior portion of the wheels, which will not necessarily be as visible. As for the return roller braces, they too have been improved. They have their cast texturing, foundry marks, as well as improved idler return roller mounting equipment added. Just like with the road wheels, these components here are listed on EastCoastArmory.com and are designed to be modified for the Armortek kit. As for the return roller itself, it too has its ECA mods that were done to it, and these are again the same exact mods that I've done on the A4, which include modifying the center portion, adding the bearing and bushing detail, as well as the Zerk fitting components. The two spring components, first with the skid rail, it is simply done out of box, no mods necessary, just primed and will be painted. Similar with the actual volute springs. The volute springs, prior to putting the paint on, you will have to wash them in a bath of turpentine, as they come heavily oiled and greased from Armortek. This is a nice feature, prevents rust from occurring onto the piece, but before assembly or paint, it's a good idea to give them a nice turpentine bath in order to fully degrease them. Once fully degreased, they instantly go into prime, and now into paint. The rear idler shafts are also ready for their paint. If we notice, the midsection and the end point have primer and will be getting their base coat, but the center portions of the shafts are protected with masking tape. This is to protect them from getting any type of paint on them, as no paint is required on these locations here, and after paint they will be greased and installed to the component. A similar procedure will be done to the sprocket mounts shafts that we have here. They will be protected in masking tape prior to painting. The same type of procedure was also done to the return roller shafts themselves. If you can see, only the tips are primed and will be painted, while the center portions are going to be left in their bare metal configuration, but will be heavily greased in order to preserve them and keep them from rusting, and also to help the wheel rotate a lot more smoothly. And here goes the suspension housing, now with its base coat of olive drab. Like I mentioned on all of my builds, it's a good idea to go ahead and paint and prime all of the suspension components on all armored fighting vehicles prior to assembly. This is because of the nature of these pieces. As you see, there's a lot of nooks and crannies in them, and if you go ahead and assemble the component without priming or painting the piece beforehand, you're bound to have exposed areas of metal, or in the case of plastic models, plastic sections exposed. Once the component, though, is all thoroughly painted, it is now time to assemble. Since the component now is all painted, as well as all the other suspension components are painted, it is now time for assembly. Now, this is one quick procedure that I did not recommend or did not mention in the M4A4 build series, is that when it comes to these Armortek suspensions, they're just like the real Sherman in that they have two real volute springs for the suspension. Now, as you can see, the inside has the two wells pre-machined in, and the springs would simply fit into the wells. Now, sometimes, due to the way the springs are coiled, they might not fit in nice and smoothly and might need a little bit of tweaking. To go ahead and insert the piece, I'll use a rubber mallet. In addition to the rubber mallet, I went ahead and also have a piece of paper here to put on top of the vise in order to protect the finish and prevent any marring. Now, sometimes it's simple, depending on the way the spring is coiled, sometimes it's a simple drop in with the aid of the mallet, or other times, if there's a little bit too much material, you can go ahead and, on the bench grinder, remove this little edge here, which will make the components fit in a little bit easier. And here go the springs right after the tweaking. As you can see, you don't want to go ahead and remove too much material. You just want to simply remove that edge and buff it down slightly. Once the edges are removed, the pieces will slip right into their housings. This one here slipped in all the way. This one here could use just a few little taps. And now they are in. The springs, with their design, will be a nice snug fit and will not pop out on you during installation or when you hold the component this way. Now, one addition to the springs that Armortek has are the addition of these two coil springs. The coil springs are added to give the suspension a lot more rigidity and make them a little bit more robust compared to the coil springs that the volute pieces have themselves. These pieces here simply just slide in as such, and then once everything is assembled, it's all held in place and is all self-contained. And here's the component now with the springs all installed, and we're now moving our way to what would be the bottom of the suspension. On the Armortek tank, just like on the real M4 Sherman tank, the swing arm apparatus is held together with a clamp. This clamp gets mounted in this location here with 3 fasteners, very similar like the real Sherman. Now, before I do, one tip to note is that the hardened steel shafts that the axles actually pivot on, if we notice here, have been lubricated with grease. The grease was applied to the shaft prior to the installation into the swing arm. In addition to adding the grease to this component here, I went ahead and added a little smear of grease to the inside portion of this portion of the housing, as well as this portion of the housing. Very small smear of grease was utilized. The purpose of this is to lubricate the suspension swing arms after everything is assembled. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that due to the paint as well as the primer coats on all of the parts, the tolerances at first are going to be very, very tight. So there will be a slight break-in period after the components are assembled. This is normal. After the component is fully assembled, it is a good idea to go ahead and work the action of the suspension in order for it to get all the paint broken in the correct locations. If, to speed up the process a little bit, a small finite amount of oil in the locations where the pieces are rubbing could also be a good idea. However, you don't want to overdo it with the oil, as the oil will have a habit on running on you and will lead to the surface, which, once the tank is ready for paint, could affect the paint, which can cause issues with the finish. As for mounting on the plate itself, this is done, like I mentioned, with 3 fasteners. The fasteners in question are going to be M3 by 16 hex bolts. The hex bolts simply slip into this plate here and they get mounted to the piece. Now, it is very important to utilize thread lock or a good Loctite on this component. A simple smear of the material and the part is now ready for installation. First, I hand thread it in, and then with the socket driver, I complete the threads. Now, what's also important to note is that keep in mind that the housing that the piece is threaded into is made out of aluminum. With the bolt being made out of steel, you don't want to go ahead and over-tighten the fasteners to the point where one of 2 things will happen. If you're over-tightening, the screw can either shear off of the thread, or you will strip the threads on the interior portion of the casing itself, neither which are ideal. When it comes to mounting on the parts, you simply thread the fastener in until it becomes hard to twist, in which case you've went through, and then if you notice, I just give it a little twist and back away. Once the fastener is installed, you let the Loctite do its job. With all 3 fasteners installed in the same format, the suspension should give you absolutely problem-free maintenance for the life of the vehicle. Installing of the center fastener is easy enough. As for the 2 on the corner, with the way the swing arms protrude from the casing, it's a good idea to put pressure on the one side with your hand in order to allow clearance for the fastener and the tool to make their way. Once all 3 of the fasteners are installed, the component is now ready for the next step. Now, as we notice, there is a little bit of grease that was squeezed out of the recesses by the installation of the part. The grease is a good idea to remove, as you don't want any of that on the surface. To remove it, I simply utilize a turpentine-soaked napkin and remove it as such. With the grease now removed, there will be absolutely no chances of the grease rubbing off on your hands and getting on other parts of the build during the construction of the model. In addition to installing the suspension arms, it's also time to go ahead and mount the rubber tires to the rims. Just like on all Armortek tanks, the hubs are separate from the actual tires. Now, these tires that you see here are actually a second batch. The original tires that came with the kit were missing in the box of parts that I had from the customer. So I went ahead and called up Armortek and was able to acquire the replacement parts that you see here. This is one advantage about working on these Armortek tanks, as their customer service is very well done, and on every build I've ever done for them, if I ever needed any replacement or spare parts, the spare parts were to be had from the company direct. Another thing as of note is that these tires that you see here have a white chalky appearance to them. This is not typical for one of their kits, and this is probably due to the fact that these are spare parts that Armortek had on hand. However, the white chalky appearance is merely on the surface and will rub off, specifically since the tank is radio controlled, and after a little bit of driving, the natural rubber color of the tire will definitely start showing through. Another thing of interest, though, is that on all of my builds, I usually go ahead and replicate a look like this with that of paint, as typically rubber weathers like this in real life. So this chalky appearance is actually going to save time later on, and it's going to actually enhance the look of the build, specifically once it's fully painted and weathered. When fitting the road wheel to the rest of the suspension housing, it's comprised out of these components over here. You have the road wheel assembly, you have 2 nylon bushings, a threaded steel shaft, and 2 nylock fasteners. Just like I mentioned on the M4A4 video, the nylocks are a nice addition that Armortek supplies you in that the pieces will not unthread while the component or while the vehicle is in motion. As for the bushings themselves with the kit out of box are not going to fit if trying to install them as is, particularly because of the layers of primer and paint which are added to the road wheel, but also the tolerances on the aluminum CNC part are tight as well. If you try to force it in, that is going to lead to issues as the PVC will simply break and crack on you before the piece actually gets installed. Before I can go ahead and install the piece with a Dremel with a rotary drum on it, I will go ahead and just eat away at the material and remove enough material for the components to fit. I'll do this in real time just to show the ease of this procedure. Now, before I go ahead and do the procedure, I will say that on the inside here, there is a small shelf, and that shelf is where this piece here actually bottoms out. You don't need to go all the way through, you just need to eat around the area. Now, luckily, the drum itself is actually very similar to the size of the actual bushing, so when it comes to drilling it out, once the drum is fully inside, that is all the depth that you're going to need to go. I will turn on the Dremel and do the procedure now. You want to go ahead and stay as even as possible so that you don't have any canted or any type of misaligned hole for the actual piece to go in. As for how much to remove, this is per feel, and it is a good idea to test fit the component every round or two until finally the piece fits into a size that's desirable. Now, you don't want to have the piece too wide, you don't want to have the piece jittering around, but it doesn't want to be too tight where you can't even insert the piece without it cracking. You need to have a nice center medium. As for the way the hole is now, there's a little bit of paint left on the inside. I'm just going to go ahead and remove that, and then this wheel here will be done, and I will then progress to the other side. Now let's install the bushings. To install the bushings, the wheel is simply placed on the vise, and the bushing will be guided in with this rubber mallet here. Now, as for the bushing themselves, I may have mentioned this on the A4 video, but it might look like it's symmetrical. However, there is a certain direction in which to input it in. If you look on this corner here, you'll see a small little bevel. This bevel is absent on the opposite side, but there is a small bevel on this side. This is designed to be inserted in this manner, where you have the outer bevel, which centers into the hole and makes it easier for it to slide in, and the internal bevel makes it easier for the actual rod to slip in as well. As for the installation, no adhesives or any type of fasteners are required. You simply just line it up, and with the mallet, simply tap it in place. And now the road wheel is ready for installation. As for the actual shaft itself, as you notice, it's threaded on both ends. The way I prefer of the installation is with some Loctite. I first apply a small little smear to one of the threads. After the smear is added, I will go ahead and thread on the fastener by hand. I will not tighten it with any tool at this point. As you see, this is a nylock fastener, and for me to go ahead and fully insert it in, you need to have something else holding onto the shaft in order for the tool to successfully install it. If you go ahead and put this in a vise or in some kind of a tool, you will mar up the smooth surface of the axle and possibly even damage the threads, which is both less than ideal. The way I like to install is first I thread it on by hand, then with some grease, I go ahead and lube up the actual axle. Once the axle has a thin smear of grease on it, just like with the other axles, it both aids in the insertion of the component and also protects it from any type of oxidation or rust, which could happen as the model is driven or as time goes on. Once the piece is lubricated, I will then insert it into the swing arm with the wheel attached. Now, to install the component, with one hand I will hold the road wheel, and the other hand I will insert the rod. Now, a lot of people might want to insert it from this side. However, as a quick tip, because the component is lubricated, if you go ahead and insert it, you will get a little ring of grease that will build up as the rod slides into its location. It's better, in my opinion, to install it from the rear port of the vehicle, as the grease can easily be wiped up and will not reflect on the finish as it's on the back end of the model. Also, at this point, it's also important to note that keep in mind your wheel orientation. Like I mentioned earlier, this model here has the EastCoastArmory.com resin detail face, along with the hubcaps, or the tire fastener detailing. With this detailing in place, this portion of the road wheel will be positioned on the outside towards the viewer, and the stock integral detailing will be on the inner surface. I first line up the road wheel, and I slide on the shaft. Now, in some cases, if you're having a little difficulty for the pins to find their correct location, with the rubber mallet I mentioned before, a couple slight little taps will guide the component into its necessary location. Once you have the threads protruding from the opposite end, with the thread lock, you put a smear on the threads, and I go ahead and again thread it on via hand at first. Once the part is threaded on with hand, it's now ready to be fastened with the tools. For the tools, I am going to utilize a vice grip as well as a socket driver. Now, in lieu of the vice grip, you could easily use a ratchet with the same type of socket in order to prevent the piece from spinning. Simply lock the vice grip in place, and I can now go ahead and thread on the fastener. Now, because the piece is threaded on both ends, you want to fully insert the screw until finally all the threads are diminished. Once the component is fully bolted on, it's nice and tight, you will notice that the road wheel will not spin. This is because of the design of the swing arm. It's like a U, and when you fasten the component on both ends, it will crimp and compress onto the wheel, preventing it from turning. The reason why you want to screw it in really tight at first is to again remove the threads. Once the part is fully installed like it is now, I loosen it slightly, about a quarter turn or so, and then from there you will notice the road wheel will begin to rotate. Now, if it's still having difficulty, it's probably because the rubber tire isn't seated on the hub fully. So you want to go ahead and find out where it's making contact and adjust the rubber tire accordingly. Once it is fully on properly, the piece will start breaking in and will begin to spin freely. After a while, or after the piece is fully broken in, it will rotate and spin just like these pieces here. Also being installed are the tank's rear idler wheels. As you can see, just like with the M4A4 build, the wheels are held onto the tank's axle with that of ball bearings. The ball bearing approach is typical for Armortek tanks, and because of which, make the component roll with extreme ease and efficiency. The parts were a nice fit. There was absolutely no enlarging or tweaking needing to be added in order to install the bearings. They simply just dropped right in. Like with all Armortek wheels that use this method, they are attached to the mount via a fastener and a CNC steel end cap. As for the actual idler mount, it is adjustable. like was mentioned in the A4 build, and as we can see, a smear of grease has been added to the bare steel shaft location of the spindle. The inner shaft also received a similar treatment prior to its installation. As you can see, the piece is currently flexible. This is because the component has not been thoroughly clamped down yet, and this will be done after the track is assembled and installed in order to obtain proper track tension. However, at this point here, I can install the wheel. Now, just like with the other components, orientation of the road wheel is important. As you can see, this one here is the outside portion of the wheel with the Zerk fittings, and this one here is the inner. The component simply just gets slid into place as such. It is at this point now where I would go ahead and install a fastener with Loctite to keep the component firmly in place. Now, it is extremely crucial that Loctite is used for this application, as you do not want this fastener working itself loose, as it can obviously cause a derailment and lead to some serious issues. Once the part is thoroughly Loctited in, the installation will be complete, and there will be no worry or risk of the component ever getting loose. And here goes the idler wheel now fixed to the model. As you can see, it spins absolutely freely in both directions. This is due to the ball bearings. Also important to note, just like with the road wheels, when you tighten the fastener on all the way, it's going to restrict the movement of the road wheel. It is a good idea to, once you install it all the way, and it's nice and tight, you gradually loosen and test it until you achieve the proper roll that you're looking for, while still retaining the fasteners thoroughly and securely in its location. As for the rim of the road wheel, as you notice, I didn't weather or do any other paint mods to the outside other than the base coat. Keep in mind, like I mentioned, all of my Sherman build videos, all VVSS Shermans featured a steel rimmed road wheel. There were no rubber tires or rubber rimmed road wheels for this component here. As the model gets driven and gets used, the paint will begin to chip and flake away from the road wheel, relieving the actual metal of the material to be visible, which will be very realistic and actually aid in its realism. Also, if we notice, there is no hubcap. For the hubcap, rather than using the kit supplied ones like I mentioned with the A4 video, I will be utilizing my own set of resin VVSS Sherman resin hubcaps. The hubcaps have been turned on the lathe in order to appropriately fit onto the Armortek road wheel. It will be a direct replacement and will simply get glued to this location here. After the filming of this video, the resin components will be primed and then affixed in the manner that you see here. Also, as you can see here, prior to the installation of the suspension, the underplate and the rear portions of the suspension, as well as the bottom of the sponsons, have received their airbrush weathering. The reason why these components have been airbrushed now is that after this point of the build, the vehicle will start getting its interior components as well as its detailing, both of which will make painting of the undercarriage very difficult, if not impossible. So prior to the installation of all these components here, I went ahead and added the weathering, so that after the components are added, and once the build progresses and the model is flipped over on its correct side, you're not going to have to worry about getting access to these locations again after the model has been fully built and weathered. And that concludes this project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek British 5 Firefly Sherman. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, and don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thank you.